Rebuttal. My quarrel with the old masters is they never made suffering big enough. That tiny leg sliding into the bay almost insults me. That it should be all we get of the falling boy after the half-hour stunt of his famous flying. Don't you see they are cartoons, the drunk hissed in the British Museum. A drunk in a sport coat. That made him look credible at first, some kind of docent, an itinerant purveyor of glosses that left me confused. I studied Bruegel's paintings, tiny skaters, and hunters come home with the tiny dead animals, gutted outside the frame, where the tiny offal presumably had been left. I was looking for Icarus, but the Musée des Beaux-Arts is in Belgium, you twit, and so I did not see the plowman wearing his inexplicably dainty shoes. A cartoon, you American sow. And no one came to my rescue in that gallery vacated even by its dust, where I also did not see the galleon, anchored below the plowman's pasture with its oblivious content with being tiny sheep. But just wait until that ship sails out and encounters the kind of storm that'll require abstract expressionism to capture the full feeling of the giant canvases of the 20th century, swaths of color with no figures in them at all. How immense the drowning when you're the boy who drowns. Between the fireball on your back and the water in front, all gray and everywhere and hard as concrete when you smack down. When I was young, I went through a really prolonged shoplifting phase, as most kids do, but it lasted into my first year in college. So I wrote a poem for those years, and my friends, I'm still very good friends with all my roommates. We got kicked out of the dorm. This was in Montreal, and we lived in a women's dorm, and we all got kicked out for smoking pot. But we said, you can't kick us out, we're leaving. So we got in an apartment in Montreal, and I was 17 years old. It was very thrilling. So this is called a romance. I saw a child set down her binder like a wall through the candy bin at the corner luncheonette, so she could scoop out gum while she spoke to the clerk, and from that moment was in love, oh theft. College was supposed to straighten me like a bent tree strangled by a wire, but being done with sweetness, I could not resist the lure of meat. How the red muscle gleamed in its shiny wrap, a wedge that had once been the thigh or the loin of a slow brute's body, sugar dirt and clotted grass, to be snatched in an instant and zipped into the croniest of pocketbooks. Radiance housed in rawhide again, as when it was living. A steak can be stuck in your jeans when you're skinny. A rump roast is right for a puffy down coat. Small chops will fit under a thin peasant blouse, where it falls off the breasts like a woodland river with a limestone amphitheater underneath. Ancient city, ancient sublet, ancient wooden fire escape. With my other bandits, I learned to say howdy-do in French. We were yanking on the cord that would start the motor of our lives, but we did not have the choke adjusted yet. Sometimes it seemed I floated in the dregs like a tea bag, bloating up with facts, until a girl ran in the door, panting hard, face red, slab thudding from her snowflake damasked waist onto the table, and we stood around it gawking at the way it seemed to breathe. This is called The Chamber. As does the poem by William Blake, this involves a poison worm. A worm that would make the blackbird who ate it flap and squawk in distress, while at regular intervals I played a tape of a bird also squawking in distress. So you see, there was this salt box girl regression going on, while I took notes. Now the bird is squawking in distress. My job being to watch on closed-circuit TV and record the bird's death, were that to occur, in the chamber made from a gutted fridge, rigged up to a button in the next room, where, when I pushed, I'd hear a musical plink over the loudspeaker as a mealworm dropped from a crown of vials that sat on the chamber, the crown rotating as the glass vials tipped, one worm per plink, though sometimes I plinked twice if the worm got stuck or if the bird failed to squawk in that tiny brick building that rustled with wings from birds scritching in cages I'd been filling for weeks. My truck full of traps I set on fence posts at dawn, when the redwings clung to tall blades in the ditches and sang shuck shriek as the dirt road fumed behind me in mirrors, while ahead bore a rising red-winged sun that I drove into, feeling immortal. How could I not feel immortal when I was mistress of the poison worm? Transcendentalism. The professor stabbed his chest with his hands curled like forks before coughing up the question that had dogged him since he first read Emerson. Why am I? Like musk oxen we hunkered, while his lecture drifted against us like snow. If we could, we would have turned our backs into the wind. I felt bad about his classes being such a snooze fest. Though peaceful, too, a quiet little interlude from everyone outside, rooting up the corpse of literature for being too Caucasian. There was a simple answer to my own question. How come no one loved me, stomping on the pedals of my little bicycle? I was insufferable. So too was Emerson, I bet, though I liked If the Red Slayer Think He Slays. That's an Emerson poem. If the Red Slayer Think He Slays, the professor drew a giant eyeball to depict the oversoul. Then he read a chapter from his own book, Nap Time. He didn't care if our heads tipped forward on their stalks. When spring came, he even threw us a picnic in his yard, where dogwood bloomed despite a few last dirty bergs of snow. He was a wounded animal being chased across the tundra by those wolves, the postmodernists. At any moment, you expected to see blood come dripping through his clothes. And I who never understood his question, though he let me climb to take a seat aboard the wooden scow he'd been building in the shade of 30-odd years. How I ever rode it out of his yard into my life remains a mystery. The work is hard because the eyeball's heavy riding in the bow.